Hello and welcome to today's Cybersecurity Summit Power Hour. My name is Rick and I will be in the background answering any WebEx technical questions. We have a few housekeeping items before we get started. If you're experiencing technical difficulties joining the WebEx session, please submit a question using the Q&A panel. During the presentation, all participants will remain in listen-only mode, and as a reminder, this event is being recorded for rebroadcast. We'll be holding a Q&A session at the conclusion of each of today's presentations. We encourage you to submit written questions at any time during the presentation using the Q&A panel at the bottom right of your screen. Please type your questions into the text field and hit send. Please keep the dropdown as all panelists. With that, we invite you to sit back, relax, and enjoy today's presentation. I would now like to introduce Bradford Rand, CEO of the Cybersecurity Summit. Bradford, you have the floor.
Great. Thank you so much, Rick, for setting this up. I'd like to thank all of our panelists in advance. We've got some wonderful speakers for today's session, and this happens to be one of the highest pre-reg numbers out of all of our regions thus far. So I thank all of our delegates coming from the Southeast, especially, to join us. Of course, we are kicking off with the FBI. Then we've got Proofpoint, Arctic Wolf, and then we'll be closing the Department of Homeland Security's Cybersecurity Division, CISA. By joining us for the entire session, you will, of course, earn a CPE credit, and we will be emailing that to you. We will be emailing that to you right after, probably in roughly 2 days. Most of the slides, of course, also will be made available on cybersummitusa.com. And without further delay, I see we have a lot of people registering right now. We're going to kick off this Cyber Summit Power Hour with Chad Hunt. He's been with the FBI now for slightly over 16 years, has been presenting at our Atlanta Cybersecurity Summits for the last 6 years. And we welcome you, Chad, to join us and give us our security briefing today. Thank you again for joining us.
Absolutely. Good morning, everybody. Thanks for joining in for this. I've got about 20 minutes to cover all of the cybers and try to get everybody up to speed on what's going on. So first,
okay, we are now teeing up our next expert. We've got Ryan Kallenberg from Proofpoint. Ryan, are you with us?
I am. Thank you very much, Bradford. The topic today, I think, is a really good one, given everything that Chad just went through, right? We talked a lot about phishing during a pandemic and all of the different social engineering-based attacks that really do dominate this landscape. And actually, I wanted to add my own answer to the question that Chad got from Beth there. This most successful change in method for the attackers. Really, that was a different answer probably a couple of months ago. And I think Chad identified the overall trend to better social engineering, which I would 100% agree with. On a more tactical basis, though, the biggest successful change in methods has been using COVID in their phishing lures. We've seen them get extraordinary click rates and engagement with those lures as the pandemic has evolved. But actually, to Greg's question, which I'm now seeing in the panelist chat, the percentage increase in cyber tech since March 15th, I will get to that, actually. And it's not necessarily a percentage increase in attempts, but certainly we are seeing some interesting trends there. So this is actually the global landscape that we observe. And at Proofpoint, we see billions and billions of emails every day. So given that the landscape is so centered around email as a threat vector, this is a pretty good proxy for what is going on overall. You'll note there that spike occurs well before March 15th. The big spike actually corresponds to one specific threat actor. We track them as threat actor 542. You might know them as Emotet, who are sort of the world's volume leader in malware. They've actually been dark since February the 9th, although they do have the distinction of launching one of the earliest COVID-themed campaigns, targeting actually Japanese companies back in late January. When they're absent from the landscape, the numbers are simply lower. So what we're seeing actually, to Chad's point, in fact, is a landscape that is roughly the same, with the exception of that one big actor not sending out additional malicious emails. That said, that botnet is active. They are doing things. We're waiting every day for Mount Emotet to erupt again. But the thing that I find interesting about this landscape is that you have really targeted payloads that are human operated start to become really common. Rats, keyloggers, etc. Those are not the sorts of things that we saw in really, really high volumes in the past, but we're certainly seeing them now. Now, if you want to actually further dissect that and focus solely on the global campaigns that use COVID as a lure, the data is a little different in terms of the threat types that the actors are using, but again, it's more similar than it is different. Downloaders, which are kind of an umbrella term for very modular malware, this is definitely the trend for malware authors in general, right? They want to infect a lot of machines, do some reconnaissance, maybe grab some credentials, figure out if they've compromised anything valuable, and then either log in themselves or sell that access onto somebody else who will log in and basically use human-operated malware. Often sort of the flow will be a downloader like TrickBot to a penetration testing tool like PowerShell Empire or Cobalt Strike through to, say, ransomware like Ryuk or Revil or something like that. The COVID lures, though, get used in basically every single type of attack. The ones that we've seen really have changed as the news cycle has changed. We went from sort of supply chain disruptions and cures and conspiracy theories in the early days, although actually the conspiracy theories have never really stopped as a phishing lure, through to things like stimulus-related fraud, FMLA fraud, when are we going back to work fraud. All of those lures are highly adaptable to really any type of attack, and we've seen them actually used by basically every actor you can think of. And the one other consistent element is if you look at the brand abuse, right? What organizations are being spoofed in these attacks, either with some direct domain spoofing and others that are simply having their brand abused. The classic ones that you always see at the top of the list are package delivery. That's actually now changed, so you can actually see things like the World Health Organization and the CDC start to actually feature in especially COVID campaigns. But also, there was a real large wave of WHO-related phishing because until about 2 weeks ago, the WHO was not actually authenticating its email, meaning anyone, anywhere could send emails from their domain, who.int, and they would probably get through most mail gateways. That was a huge vulnerability, and certainly credit to the WHO team in shutting that down. So let's actually dig into some of these actors, the lures they're using, and maybe who they are. And in a relatively quiet period for the threat landscape, you can actually take an interesting look in there because you're not just talking about Emotet and the big volume guys. So let's see, threat actor 544, banking Trojan focused actor, mostly targets Europe. At the time I checked this one, their big lure was a fake bill, fattura, and if you speak Italian, targeting Italian companies. You had threat actor 511, which is another big scale cyber actor that is what we call a large crime actor. They're targeting the US and the UK with a fake COVID-19 map. A substantially lower volume actor that we track as threat actor 2715 that are more interested in those BEC and supply chain style attacks. They're hitting the United Arab Emirates with a WHO lure. And at the same time, you have other groups, threat actor 2536, which we also track as Modest, which is a Nigerian actor, an Iranian actor, maybe the one I can talk about the most freely because it's okay with my threat research team. We call them Silent Librarian. They target almost exclusively higher education and things adjacent to higher education. They clone library login pages, actually, and go after students, faculty, mostly faculty, and some administrative personnel. And they then very clearly use those compromised accounts for lots of other things, not just to access data, but also to launch future attacks, because those email addresses are absolutely gold when it comes to using for your follow-on phishing. Another actor there that is a likely nation-state one, although they I can't really go into much detail in the attribution. As Chad mentioned, attribution has actually become substantially harder over the last couple of years. An actor we call VIIRS, They target almost exclusively telcos, and they were doing something before it was cool, meaning they were going after VPN credentials, cloning authentication portals, and actually being able to proxy an MFA login with a one-time passcode. That's very, very, very interesting overall. And really, in a more targeted landscape like this, you're going to see pretty much universal usage of COVID lures, but a really radically different set of actors and motivations, all kind of mixed in together, unified by their shared interest in social engineering. Now, moving through the data here, the one thing that really is a clear trend, and has been a trend for over 2 years now, none of this stuff works if people don't fall for the social engineering. If you do not click, it will not be effective. If you do not fall for the imposter email that is trying to get you to buy gift cards or change payroll, it will not work. So it's a targeting of fundamentally human vulnerability and not technical vulnerability. You'll notice here that for those of you who've been in InfoSec for a long time, like I have, you might expect to see more actual vulnerabilities on this list used as the method of the targeted attacks, rather than, say, PowerShell and macros and all this stuff. There's only one vulnerability in active use right now. We saw Internet Explorer 0-day get used by some nation states back in Q1. But that 2017-11-882, that's the old equation editor vulnerability from late 2017. And the reason it's still in use is that Microsoft didn't exactly fix it. So it is still a reliable exploit. But at this point, why do something hard, find a vulnerability in a modern operating system, or actually probably a chain of bugs, and write a reliable exploit for it, when you can do something super easy? Get somebody to run your macro for you, or get somebody to simply run code that you send them. It's just an easier game for them to play, and they've been playing it very, very successfully. Now, if you look at the malware families, again, we're featuring the sort of the last couple of weeks here. You're going to see classic bankers like Dridex at the top of that list, but then there's some really more interesting targeted ones, that make up that world of rats and keyloggers. Agent Tesla, Nanocore, a bunch of these others have a fairly similar history, but interestingly, they've just adopted over time to the new wave of attacks that really do emphasize exactly what Chad was saying: business email compromise, supply chain fraud, all of the ways that the actor can get in between you and somebody you're supposed to be sending legitimate money to. That's really what they're going for. And cloud accounts play a huge role in that. So if you think about what you might do about securing all this, well, you have a really distracted user population working from home for the first time. They're not on the corporate network, so your visibility is different than it used to be, right? You're at a higher risk for all those downloaders that might have been sitting there latent, pulling down secondary payloads. So that's something they're watching really, really closely. A lot of that malware is not, in fact, proxy aware. And so it's much, much more problematic for it to be able to reach out directly to something on the internet than it would be on a traditional corporate network setup. And from a visibility perspective, if you have people using cloud apps, like pretty much everybody is right now, you're probably going laptop to home router to cloud application, to Office 365. If you're not using the APIs in Office 365 or some other technology to see what's going on inside Office 365, you're probably missing most of the threat landscape. Not just because Exchange Online is where all the threats are starting, but also because OneDrive and SharePoint are where most of the payloads are being staged. It's extraordinary the degree to which O365 has sort of become a one-stop shop for the attackers. They've moved to the cloud in exactly the same ways we have. And then there's the high-risk home network, on which, of course, if you're connecting to a traditional VPN setup, might allow an attacker kind of straight into an unsegmented corporate network. So when you look at kind of a secure transition, you might want to think about a couple of different things. Obviously, making sure people are getting your emails and, of course, all those other collaboration applications. A little harder to stop things like SMSs, but that's going to be the number one way in which people are targeted. For those of you that saw the Verizon DBAR come out, that's 96% total breaches starting that way. Innovative approaches like web isolation work on remote computers when you're not behind the layers of corporate network protection. You might, if you have a set of people like customer service workers that were always in a data center where physical security mattered a lot, you maybe took their phones away before they started looking at customer data. Being able to actually track what they do with customer data, probably on their endpoints, has been a huge trend in restoring some of the visibility that's been lost over the last couple of months. And then, of course, there's the cloud side of things. So what are known as cloud access security brokers are highly valuable, making sure people are only authenticating with the devices that are in reasonably good health, per Chad's point around patching. And of course, there's this big trend around zero trust, which we don't really have time to talk about today, although I wish we did. So let's show you some of the threats. COVID-19 threats like credential phishing. This is my nominee for most evil lure of the last couple months. You can see it's spoofing Zoom's brand, and if you have incredibly good eyes, you'll see that it's actually basically inviting you to a meeting in which you will be fired. Most people are going to fall for this. We were blocking it, of course, but credentials are the objective of an attack like this, and an attack like this is highly likely to succeed. Now, if you're talking about the file sharing abuse, where are the cybercriminals hosting their payloads? Well, office.com, docs.google.com, windows.net, sharepoint.com. That was the top 4 in the period for which I pulled threat data. They are in the same place as we are. We're in this weird situation where Office 365 is what we are protecting and what is attacking us. It is a very odd place to be, but Microsoft continues to miss these threats, and it really kind of makes everything harder, especially when you combine that with what Chad was mentioning, the attacks on the cloud accounts through things like password spray and password replay attacks. Now, some of these attacks have complicated multi-stage threats, meaning they do a couple of different things together. I'm going to go relatively briskly through this because I know we started a couple minutes late here. But of course, BEC, right? Here's a BEC example that just happens to use coronavirus. It's not a particularly good one, but they're sort of just sprinkling COVID-19 in everything because they know it makes their social engineering more effective. And this really interesting trend that I did want to spend a moment on, malicious third-party apps. If you're talking about how to attack Office 365, if it's well defended, if it's got multi-factor authentication mandated for it, well, why not just register a third-party app, maybe a web app in this case, and share a file from it or make it look like you're sharing a file and have somebody log into real Microsoft, not even fake Microsoft. And then you get an OAuth token, not the creds. The OAuth token's better because it doesn't actually die when those creds get reset. And also, it's even useful for information gathering. That one on the upper right impersonates the government of Mexico's health secretary and has a same malicious third-party app structure to actually claim to get COVID updates, but really is just doing broad-scale surveillance. So in terms of the numbers, 75 million messages over just a recent week. That's been about normal. We're at about, actually, the numbers are higher since I submitted this deck. We're about 350 total campaigns. The themes have evolved over time, but I think we've addressed this quite thoroughly. But more is really the same than it is different, as Chad pointed out. Payloads are the same. Techniques are the same. What is different is the social engineering. And just maybe 1 or 2 more examples that are really fascinating. I think also gel with some of Chad's themes. This one is unbelievable as a lure, right? It says it's a sexual harassment report and basically says, my attention was called that a customer was assaulted by one of your staff. Here's the video attached to the email and open this up. And it's an ISO file. This is an incredible bit of social engineering. But that exact same campaign also used the bottom lure, which is a DHL package lure that basically says, you got to go to the warehouse because of COVID-19. Really the best possible example of the threat landscape right now, I think, because it's using COVID without actually ever having to do anything other than tweak the social engineering. And it's using actually a different non-COVID lure that is probably getting more clicks. But none of the techniques are different. This is different. This is Remco's rat. It's the classic sort of thing that we've seen forever and ever. Now, I want to make sure that we get through the last interesting example here and keep the power hour on time. This is the one we've seen in the last couple of weeks, spoofing the Department of Labor about FMLA adjustments. As people are under economic hardships, looking for help, this is a really prevalent threat, and the social engineering here is actually quite good, just as Special Agent Hunt was saying. I'm going to go through the last set here. Obviously, when you're trying to protect against this, well, you want to protect your people. Those people are often targeted mostly by email, but it really is useful also, again, to make sure that they're resilient, make sure that they're enabled to protect themselves in the organization via good security awareness training. We have a ton of free resources on that. It's something I would highly, highly encourage because, again, so much of this is about human vulnerability, not technical vulnerability. And of course, moving to a more data-centric way, a more cloud-centric way to protect data is really going to be the new normal when it comes to protecting all this. And then finally, here's some resources. If you're more on the technical side, there's some COVID-19 SIGs for your IPSs. And we actually are offering a wide set of threat intel through the blog that's linked there. But if you have any questions, I would be glad to take them now that, Bradford, I think you have gotten off mute.
Yes. Hey, how are you? Thank you again for joining us. We have right here. What are the keys? What are the key do's and don'ts to protect your newly remote workers? Is there something you can succinctly? I know you covered a few of them, but there's especially any kind of do's and don'ts?
Yeah, I would call out the big ones. Don't lose visibility. Right? If you're actually pointing everybody towards Office 365 and just letting them connect without ever seeing their network traffic, at least go look at what's happening inside those cloud apps. Use CASB, use those APIs, use what you get from the cloud services themselves. That's a really, really key thing. And then also don't make architectural decisions that you're going to regret later. Zero Trust is really effective right now as a way to make sure that people with remote access only have access to the things that they need and not the entirety of the corporate network. Those tools are out there. Ours is actually free for the next couple of months. We're making it available to everybody. It really is not a great idea to just open up wide-scale VPN access from home. I think we have a question from Mark here, but please go ahead, Bradford.
We have someone had just put up there. I've implemented monthly phishing simulations. Is that overkill?
It's a good question. I think that is going to be a really good data sample, but it's probably the top end of what we would suggest for an entire population. If you rotate that through different groups, though, it's not overkill. One of the best things that you can do is, even though we're all working from home and there's not really water cooler chat anymore, is just make sure you're testing different populations with the lures they're actually receiving. So insofar as you can actually get some threat intel from the email security side of things, figure out, oh, well, finance is getting targeted by lures that look like this one, maybe simulate a BEC style attack. HR is getting a very different set of lures. Do that more on a custom basis. Then doing it monthly is definitely not overkill.
All right, let's see if we have one. Do cloud services, okay. Do cloud services offer VPN tunneling to protect the transmission of data?
Absolutely. So there's a whole world of what are called Zero Trust network access solutions that are probably the ideal way to consume a cloud service that does the traditional sort of IPsec tunneling. There's different architectural ways you can do it. You can do split tunneling, or you can do not split tunneling. Obviously, doing split tunneling is cheaper, but it has some security disadvantages. It's really worth digging into, and it's much, much better to do overall than kind of a traditional VPN approach where you're just hopping on the corporate network and extending it out to people's home offices. Our version of that, which I mentioned, is Meta. I think there's a question coming in on that. That's basically an overlay network solution. So I'm actually on it right now. So I've actually got access to about 5 things that still live in our data centers. Our cloud is protected behind that, but really only the set of IPv6 addresses that belong to people logged into the Meta client can actually access those cloud services. So it's really a Zero Trust access tool.
Wonderful. Ryan, you've covered a lot in a short period of time. And don't worry, I was never going to cut you off. So you always have the 2-minute buffer. Thank you so much for joining us, Ryan. I look forward to future presentations with you.
It's been a pleasure. Thanks, Bradford.
You got it. All right, Tom.
How's it going?
It's going well. Okay, Tom is joining us from Arctic Wolf, and he's going to continue the conversation of this new world we're living in right now. So, Tom, without further delay, the floor is yours.
Thanks, I appreciate it. So, my name is Tom Muttley. I'm a systems engineer here at Arctic Wolf, and we're going to talk to you today about the current state of email security. Now, it's funny that we're just following Proofpoint because he's given you a lot of very detailed examples, and so our talk is a little bit more general because Arctic Wolf focuses on security operations as a whole. So monitoring all of the things that are happening in your environment, detecting events, potential security breaches, and then responding to those breaches. And so email is a part of that, and we want to just talk about that on a high level. So what I'm going to go through here is, this is the agenda. So basically, we're going to start with some email numbers and facts, and I think we'll speed through this a little bit because we've heard a lot so far. We're also going to go over email history and trends, things that we've seen in the industry. I'll go through an example of detecting a phishing attack. So in this example, we'll assume that the attacker was able to bypass the email gateway in one way or another, and we'll see how we can still detect that attack. And then lastly, I'll finish up with cybersecurity using the CIS controls framework. And basically the idea there is to put some processes behind the technology and the people that are going to be protecting your environment. And so let's get going with the email numbers, in fact. So in the 2019 Verizon DBIR, they said that 32% of attacks involve phishing. This year, I think it's down to 24% or something like that, because they've also included a rise in human error and business email compromise. But phishing is still one of the main attack vectors in order to get the initial access into a network, because getting somebody's user credentials is extremely valuable, and it leads to other sort of pivots that an attacker can make. When it comes to types of phishing that we're seeing with COVID, people are impersonating the World Health Organization, like we heard before, but also they're a little bit more, scheming than that. They're trying to make you think that you can sign up with their website and get your stimulus checks or get your small business loans. And so we're seeing a lot of email phishing involving, sign up for your money. Also with email attacks, we have seen that malware is delivered primarily through email. Email is the bear share of the way you can actually get malware into an environment. And so one of those is just the old classic email attachment. You see an email like we saw just a minute ago where it says open this file, or because your boss says so. The person opens that file and then it executes some sort of code that then has compromised their machine. But we also see email links where a website is compromised. It could be a legitimate website that has been compromised, or it could be a website specifically set up to deliver the malware. The user gets the email, clicks on the link. They're just doing their job. They think that they have to do this to click on this link, and unfortunately, it installs malware. So let's talk about some of the history and trends behind it. So in 1996, the term phishing was coined. So it's been around for quite a while, but we saw the real rise in phishing in the thousands. In 2000, they had the famous I love you worm, which basically spread around the entire internet, and that was all spread by email. In 2007, we saw Gmail released onto the market and a huge amount of adoption of that. In 2011, Microsoft Office 365 was introduced. In 2018, Office 365 had 150 million users, and Gmail had 1.5 billion users. So it's pretty evident here that these SaaS platforms are dominating the marketplace when it comes to email usage. And this makes it important to highlight what we were just seeing. It's important to have visibility into these environments. Just because it's in the cloud doesn't mean it's secure. And so in 2019, 4.7 billion phishing emails every day, which is kind of crazy to think about. So let's run through a quick example of how we might detect a phishing attack. So this is a classic DocuSign phishing. So the person has sent a document. They said, hey, you need to go ahead and sign this right away. In this example, it's for their bonus. Everybody wants to see how much they're going to get paid. And so the person receives the email. They click on the link within the email, and then they open up a website that looks very familiar to them. It looks just like the standard login page. As the person is clicking on that and opening that website, their browser is sending a GET message to a particular server. So the server has a domain name and an IP address. So as you're monitoring the network traffic, you can see that the flow has a particular destination IP address and domain name. And so one of the ways that we can detect phishing is to compare all HTTP flows on the network with lists of known or suspected phishing domains. And so one of the ways that there's a few ways that you can classify domains or individual URLs as suspected of phishing. And one of those is just basically, known examples or lists that are published and things that you can download and curate. But another thing you can do is use whois information to determine, when the domain was registered, how old it is, that sort of thing. Just because the domain's new doesn't mean that it's a phishing website, obviously. But using indicators like that you can make a determination, hey, we should look a little bit closer at this traffic. In this case, there was a red flag because this was a known phishing domain. And so the next thing here is we want to drill down on this incident. So you see that somebody went to a phishing website. And so you immediately think, uh-oh, the person got phished, sound the alarm, reset the password, all that. But the reality is this happens very frequently throughout the day. And if you were to, try to analyze every single time somebody goes to a phishing website, you would simply be overloaded. There's just too much work to do. But thankfully, a lot of people are able to recognize that it's not the correct website and close the web browser. So in this example, what we've done is, this is an incident focus. What we've done is we've correlated data from around the same time of the event. So we've captured other HTTP transactions that were before and after the person clicked on the phishing link. And if you've ever seen a web page load, or if you've designed web pages, you understand that there's typically between 50 and 100 HTTP transactions whenever somebody loads a website. And so it's hard to sort of sift through that if you think about the number of phishing attempts plus the number of HTTP transactions per attempt. It gets to be a lot of data to sift through. So what we're doing here is we're going to look for a very specific item. We're looking through all those HTTP transactions, and we want to see a post. And we actually don't want to see it, but in order to determine this is a real attempt, we want to see a post. And what this means is the person was on the website, they filled out the form, and they clicked submit. So in this case, the person went to a phishing lure, they filled out the information, they clicked submit, and then their browser sent an HTTP post message. And that post message, if you investigate that further, contains a hashed version of the person's credentials, their username and password. And so this is when we can say, okay, this is not a false positive. This isn't just another, person clicking on a phishing link. This person actually went to the malicious website and then filled out the information and clicked submit. So at this point, it's important to, notify the company involved here that the user was phished. And so the key pieces of information that you need to know are the username, their device, and the phishing website that they went to as an informative piece. And so obviously the remediation is to go ahead and reset the user's credentials, but also run a virus scan on their device, because as we saw before, with these malicious websites, we're also seeing malware download as well. So the next thing here to go through is broadening the scope a little bit away from only email, and just using the CIS controls. If you haven't heard of those, it's the Center for Internet Security has a list of 20 controls to use to improve your cybersecurity posture. And at Arctic Wolf, we try to help companies out with that on a pretty significant basis. And I want to talk a little bit about why that is and where we're coming from. So if you look at the industry averages here, according to the Ponemon Institute, there's 230 days to identify that your network has been breached. So think about how long that is. That is it's kind of crazy to think about how much damage can somebody do if they have access to your network and your infrastructure for 230 days. I mean, that's terrible. So after that, the mean time to contain or basically recover from an attack is 84 days. And it kind of makes sense. The longer somebody is in your network, the more chance they have to do damage. And so, the time it's going to take to recover from that is longer. And the issue here is this is not a, spending problem. People are spending a ton of money on cybersecurity. I think last year the number was 140 billion spent on security tools. And but the number of breaches are still increasing, and the mean time to identify is also unfortunately increasing. So what we can see here is that in general terms, the tools are doing a great job, but we're still seeing attacks. And so it's not necessarily a tools problem, it's more of an operations problem. And so if you're going to do effective security operations, it's important to start with a framework. Now, we like the Center for Internet Security, but there are other frameworks as well. And we also help folks map to the NIST framework, for example. But the idea behind the framework is just to identify the different areas that you need to have controls in place, and to also identify the types of controls, the types of tools that you need, the processes that you need, and the configurations as well. And so if you look at the CIS controls, you might already be familiar with these, but if you're not, I would definitely suggest just doing a Google search, and this is free to download, and they have a ton of detail. I believe they have 71 total controls. These are individual line items, things that they suggest that you implement. And they start off, I like the way that they've really framed this, because they start off with basic controls, then they move to foundational controls, and then they move to organizational. And so basically, you can really improve your security posture a lot just by implementing the basic controls. In fact, according to CIS, you can prevent 80% of attacks if you simply implement the top 5 basic controls. So it's important to have a framework, start with the idea, and execute against that plan so that you can actually achieve continuous improvement. The basic controls are just things like vulnerability management, inventory of all of your hardware and software, making sure that you have secure configurations for devices, for domain controllers, things like that. You move on to the foundational, and things get a little bit more advanced here. So now we're talking about advanced malware defenses, email and web protection like Proofpoint, controlled access networks, things of that nature. And then finally, organizational are more around the high level and more advanced programs, like having a security awareness and training program for your organization, making sure you have incident response plans and management of incident response. And if a company can get to a point where you have all of these controls in place, then it's still not going to be perfect. You're not going to prevent anything from ever happening, but you will be able to identify it quickly and recover quickly, and that's really the main goal here. And so I want to just focus on the progression, so your maturity in the process. And this is true of any framework, but we've put this around the CIS controls. So if you go with the basic controls and implement group 1, then you're going to be about 26% of the way there. And then in order to get to implementation group 2, you have to implement 57% more or additional controls of the overall framework. So it's a big jump from 1 to 2. But like I said before, they say that you can prevent 80% of attacks if you just implement group 1 by itself. The point of this is, even though there's a ton of work between phase 1 and phase 2, it's important to start with the basics, because a lot of times we'll see organizations that try to go and do sophisticated work, like get a full-on penetration test. And those are valuable, those are good tools to use, but it's not necessarily as important as some of the stuff in the basic group. You're kind of putting the cart before the horse in that case. And so the next thing I'd talk about is how Arctic Wolf helps with the CIS controls. So if you're doing nothing at all, then you can implement what I mean is no monitoring. You can implement about 4 of the controls and have 6% coverage. With Arctic Wolf doing security operations, you can implement about 66 of the controls and have 94% coverage. And so that's the main point we're trying to make here, is that we're going to make sure that you have visibility and control of all the various tools and processes and people that are involved. And the way that we do that is we have built a security monitoring platform, which is based off of a cloud-native infrastructure, where we bring in data from all of the tools that you have in your environment. So Arctic Wolf leverages your existing investments and then puts together the people and the processes behind that to monitor all the information, analyze it, filter out the false positives, and highlight the true positives. And then once we've identified those true positives, we reach out to you with a remediation plan, as well as offering up remote support through our concierge security teams. So these are named individuals that you get to work with on a daily basis. And anytime you interact with Arctic Wolf, you're going to talk to one of the same 2 people. And that way they get to know your environment, they know your processes, they know the people that are responsible for different tasks within your organization. And so it really limits the amount of time it takes to identify problems, and then respond to those problems. And so you can see that the way we collect information from your environment is multifaceted. And so this kind of goes to the point of, email consists of over 90% of breaches. So over 90% of breaches involve email in some way, but it's also important to monitor other things as well. And so on the left-hand side, we're pulling in data from your network based off of our Arctic Wolf sensor, which is a physical device that monitors all of the traffic. It also collects all of the logs from your environment. So server logs, antivirus logs, firewall logs, any security tools that you have, we want to collect all of that information. We also have the Arctic Wolf agent, which is installed on devices. And what this does is collects information about the device as well as monitors for security incidents, like someone plugs in a USB drive or some process starts killing other processes. The agent also enables Arctic Wolf to perform what we call managed containment, or when we detect that there is a data breach or ransomware, we can shut down that device so it can't communicate with anything else on the network, effectively stopping the spread of whatever threat exists. And then lastly, we have cloud connectors, and this is basically just an API interface to specific services. And so we'll take data from the APIs of Office 365, G Suite, Azure, AWS, and some others. And the idea here is not only to monitor their security telemetry, but also every event that happens within the system. So when somebody logs into Office 365, that generates an event. Especially if they, entered the wrong password, that generates a incorrect password, login event. If somebody goes in and changes inbox rules, that also generates an event. It doesn't necessarily generate a security alert, but it's still an interesting piece of information. And the reason I say that is because one of the things we're seeing that's the most common trend today is attackers are leveraging cloud services in order to do advanced recon and then pivot their attacks to be more effective. And so if someone gets their account compromised for Office 365, we see attackers logging in, setting up inbox rules, reading emails from particular individuals or with particular attachments or data associated with the emails, and then using the information they find in order to launch the next phase of their attack. So if you're not monitoring those cloud services, then you're definitely going to miss a big key piece of advanced threats. And so, one of the things that I'll also mention here is that it might not seem like that big of a deal if somebody is just logging in and reading emails, but these are the early parts of the cyber kill chain. These are the early components where attackers are trying to perform that advanced recon, which will allow them to do massive damage if it goes unchecked. All right, and so I could go on forever on this, but I think I'll stop there. So let's talk about questions and answers. I see there's a question in chat there.
Okay. We've got, let's see. Let's just bring this back on. Okay. You've kind of touched before on this. What sort of email threats are you seeing during this transition to remote working because of the COVID-19 outbreak? You kind of touched upon that a little bit.
Yeah. So we're talking a lot about email today, so I kind of hit that already. But just one of the things that I'll mention is that a lot of people who haven't done remote meetings before are now doing remote meetings. And so I guess really the most predominant, phishing scam that we're seeing is around remote meeting software. So, click this link to join my Zoom or Teams or WebEx or whatever it is meeting. So that's one that I think people should be very aware of. And the main thing there is just, look at the actual link itself. So if you see these emails, they're very sophisticated. They're HTML formatted. They look exactly like the legitimate emails. So it's very important to have your employees take the time to look at the link itself before clicking.
Sure. Got another one here. Can MDR be implemented in highly regulated environments, such as Pub 1075? For example, can you get through the logistics of IRS acceptance without the vendor becoming an agent of the state?
That's a good question. So basically, all of our data is protected per customer. So it's encrypted at rest. It lives in Amazon Web Services in the United States. And we don't have sort of direct data sharing with any organization. We do pull down security intelligence from government websites, like we have the Department of Homeland Security feed with their 6 taxi framework and all that. So we're pulling down information, and we also contribute indicators of compromise as well. But we make it a big point to protect our customers' data, and we have ISO 27001 and SOC 2 Type 2 compliance and all that good stuff. So yeah, we definitely try to protect customer data. That's a big focus for us.
Okay. I guess touching upon that, any particulars on how Arctic Wolf is different from other MDR providers?
Yeah, so the two main things I will say there is that Arctic Wolf is really centered around security operations. We built the company from the ground up around that idea. So it's not, we aren't a tools company that's trying to sell you a tool and then a service on top of that tool. We sell the service itself, and with that comes the concierge security team. So these are people with anywhere from 10 to 30 years of experience in cybersecurity that you have an opportunity to work with on a day-to-day basis, and they really become an extension of your team. And that we find is really different from other MDR providers out there.
Terrific. I actually just shared your info with 400 people that are registered on, and thank you so much again for joining us, Tom. This is wonderful, and we look forward to future debriefs and presentations from you and the team over there at Arctic.
All right. Thank you.
You got it. Okay. Our final presenter, one of our star presenters, Clint Walker from DHS/CISA, and he will go into the definition of what CISA is. Most of you already know that new division, but I will let him go into details. He'll talk about the tools that are at your fingertips that have been, as I like to say, already been paid for by taxpayer money. He's a great presenter. Clint, thank you so much for joining us again.
Oh, thank you for having me. It's always a pleasure to be able to come out and speak, even if I'm sitting in my house, doing it just like everybody else.
Yep, sitting in my house as well. Thank you so much, and we'll let you finish up our conversation here. Thank you again, Clint.
Thank you very much. As everybody else, I'm at my home, doing this presentation. So if you hear the dogs going nuts, it's probably because Amazon's dropping a box off, because my wife has taken it upon herself to single-handedly save Amazon, during this pandemic. So I think we get boxes shipped every day. We have a whole garage full of them. I think we're starting a cardboard factory. But my name is Clint Walker. I'm with the Department of Homeland Security, Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency. I am here, we as the nation's risk manager. Our job, we are a newer division, or newer agency, I should say now, that is an offshoot of the Department of Homeland Security. We are here to actually protect federal networks and to protect critical infrastructure. I say those two things separately because, a lot of people out there are like, oh, well, you're just trying to help yourself. You're helping to protect the federal networks. And it's like, no, we're also protecting critical infrastructure. We're using the exact same tools and techniques to protect ourselves that we are with critical infrastructure, which means that we eat our own dog food. Everything that I'm talking to you about today, we're doing in-house as well. We're also the agency responsible for proactive cyber protection. So we're looking at threat intelligence. We're working with the vendors and suppliers, some great speakers earlier today. All of them made great points and talked about all the frameworks that are out there, all the different tools. Nobody can do it by themselves anymore. And so we're out there for proactive cyber protection. We would prefer to do proactive protection rather than incident response, although we can do both. And then, of course, we're responsible for emergency communications as well. So we help with all the cellular or communication models in order when disaster strikes. So you keep hearing me refer to critical infrastructure and what exactly that is. Well, there's 16 sectors of critical infrastructure defined by the federal government. You can see from this list here, it's pretty all-encompassing, and you can look at that list and you can see that every one of you out there probably supports one or multiple of those sectors on any given day. And you can see that those sectors, if even one of them is impacted, it's going to have a spider effect or a domino effect that's going to touch on several other infrastructures as well. You can't take, critical manufacturing out of the picture and not impact, communications or facilities or information technology. This pandemic is really highlighting that supply chain where when you hit food and agriculture, all the things that spiral out of control, all the transportation system issues, emergency services, our hospitals being overloaded. So we focus on critical infrastructure, both from a physical security and kinetic response, as well as the cybersecurity and cyber response. And when I talk about risk landscape, this is really what I'm talking about. Over time, we've seen that these 5 distinct areas of risk landscape exist. And the one thing that I've noticed, and I've been doing this for over 20 years, is that each of these, vectors used to be separate from each other. Everything was kind of independent. Your active terrorism was an active terrorism. Extreme weather was extreme weather. There was nothing that linked these things together. But in this day of age, as I'm going to talk about here in a moment, there is one underlying thing that is in every single one of these areas, and that's technology. An active terrorism is going to have a technology impact to it. A cyber attack, of course, is going to have a technology impact. But we've seen extreme weather, whether it be a hurricane, tornado, those sort of things impact cyber. The pandemic has definitely impacted our capability to do cyber or to do technical things. And then, of course, accidents or technical failures. So when we come into organizations and we're talking to them about their incident response plan, most people hand us what they consider a cyber incident response plan, and it covers one thing. That's usually ransomware, or it might cover a denial of service attack or just a cyber attack. But we really like to see your incident response plan say, how is your cyber going to manage itself through all 5 of these categories? How would your cyber hold up through a pandemic? Were you prepared for, making your workforce work from home? Were you prepared for the different types of, not being able to get to facilities or being able to have face-to-face with people? From a cyber standpoint, was your technology able to scale to handle that pandemic? And that's what we're looking at. Here in the Southeast, of course, hurricanes are always a big thing for us. So extreme weather. Most people have a hurricane response plan, but does your hurricane response plan have a cyber element to it? Communication action plan, does it have, alternate sites, other locations, who's going to enact those things? And how does that overlap during a pandemic? So is your hurricane response plan this year going to differ because we're also in a pandemic at the same time? How are you going to get people to go to an alternate site, especially if that alternate site is some time away, if they have to go out in public or if they have to be working, they're used to working at home, are you going to put people in a room with masks and gloves? That's the sort of thing that you need to think about. But why are we doing all of that? Well, it's because cyber is now no longer just a niche thing. It is in everything that we do. Cyber is the foundation to our communications and information technology, sector. It's in everything. And now we're looking at, you went from being able to secure your business, and now you're securing your business and you have to help your employees secure their homes. Why? Because they're doing business from their home, or they're doing business on the road, or they're doing business in many different areas. We've got so many things in our life now that are interacting and communicating at all times. We've got Nest thermostats, we've got Ring doorbells, we've got coffee makers that are online so you can start brewing a cup of coffee from your phone. We've got refrigerators that will order milk for you. We've got so many things that are on a normal home network. And then think about all the things on your normal, work network, all the things that are out there, things that people are plugging in. Do you really know all the devices that your network has? Do you know how important they are? The number of times we've done incident response for organization, we've shown up to find out that there was a device that nobody knew about that was the cause, that was patient 0, or they didn't realize that that one little antenna on top of that one little building was actually the most critical piece of their entire system, that if that thing went down, that everything else stopped working. Do you really understand your data flows in your network? Do you understand what's important, what's critical, and what information is being stored, transmitted, or processed across those devices? But think about that. Think about how you're being targeted. We've heard every speaker today has talked about how the threat actors are varying their techniques. As new situations arise, they're using those to their advantage. They're using social networking. They know how to, figure out who we're doing business with, who talks to who. They can look online, usually for most organizations, and figure out that Mary's in charge of accounting and that Mary has to go to Bob in order to get something approved. So, of course, their phishing email now is going to be addressed to Mary, and it's going to CC Bob on it so that they're trying to hit that entire thing the exact way that we do business processes. They're looking for that. They're using LinkedIn. They're using social media. They're using conferences. They're looking at job postings. What are you hiring for? If you're hiring for something, that probably means you might not have an expert in the field on that job currently, or at least now they know exactly what types of technologies you're using internally. Do you need a Cisco expert, or do you need a Microsoft expert? What are you looking for? Also, I've seen that some threat actors have been pulling resumes from people who currently work for your company, trying to figure out the names of, what projects you have going on, or what software or hardware you're using, how adept or skilled these people seem to be. So they're pulling all this stuff together in order to figure out your organizational chart, your trade associations, how you're doing business, who's sending you finished product, who's sending you code, what your approval process for that is. And they're using all of that to build a better phishing campaign or a better attack vector for your organization. Do you really understand how you look to the outside world? Have you ever taken a look at your own web pages, or your own LinkedIn page, or your own, business processes to say, how do we look to the people that we do business with? Do we have checks and balances in place? Are we picking up the phone to validate or verify them when these things happen? Who's allowed to give approval? Are there any single points of failure or single points of authorization that are happening within our organization? Because it's no longer called IT security. We call it cybersecurity now. And there's actually a reason for that. The reason for that is because IT is no longer the only technology that we use to get business done. We now use information technology systems and operational technology systems. So it's IT and OT working together. Think about all the different things that happen in a normal business or even a normal home. You've got heating and air conditioning. You've got elevators, escalators, badge access doors. You've got camera systems. You've got communication systems. All of these things are what we call operational technologies. Think about all the OT or IT in a car. Think about now, back in the 70s and 80s, you could work on your car with just a wrench, and some good old elbow grease. And nowadays, you almost need to be, a computer person to get anything out of the car. Everything's diagnostic. Everything's computer controlled. Fuel injection systems, the whole 9 yards. Systems have all of these different communication modes in them. How are we securing all of that? Production systems, robots, healthcare systems, x-ray machines. We've got, heart monitors. We've got life support systems. These are all now networked through our IT services, but they're operational technologies. It's the Internet of Things. It's operational technology integrating with information technology. And yet when we as DHS go into most organizations, they have an IT security shop that focuses on looking for anomalies in IT systems or looking at hacks to IT systems, but nobody's monitoring the OT systems. How many of you could guarantee that your badge access system has been patched and is up to date? How many of you could guarantee that your HVAC system, it couldn't be breached and get somebody onto your network? These are all the things that you have to look at. Is your cybersecurity program taking account for all the systems that you actually have or that are actually connected by your IT networks in order to maintain or manage them? Because this is what we're looking at. Information technology and operational technology, although they're working together, they don't always work well together. And what I mean by that is that OT systems are usually large ticket price items. They usually have a lifespan of about 40 years. So when you buy something like an elevator or something like that, you don't go out and refresh it every 3 years like you would somebody's laptop. I mean, this is a huge endeavor or a huge purchase for you. But yet you still need something that's going to talk to it, still going to communicate with it. You might have legacy systems on your network that are going to be talking to these systems, or you need to allow certain ports or protocols or services to operate because you might not patch that system every patch Tuesday. It might be a once a year kind of thing. So you're living with those anomalies or those, vulnerabilities for maybe a year because you don't have time to patch that system. So this is what we're looking at. The threat actors are targeting your integration of information technology and operational technology, as well as the human element between it, usually because that means that your physical security, your facilities shop, and your information technology shop all have to talk together to make these systems work. And they're going to target those interoperations They can hide in your OT systems to infect your IT systems, or they can hide in your IT systems to disrupt your OT systems. Just be aware that that's happening out there. Which brings us to teleconference security. I mean, this is what we're looking at today. We're in a pandemic. We're looking at ways to make people work from home. We've all talked about it. We're doing more and more remote meetings. We've already seen that the threat actors have begun sending out, bogus emails with, information on how to click here to join this meeting, or find out more information here, or go here to this site. So make sure that you understand that part of your training and awareness program for your people is saying exactly what tools you use, what you're allowing to be used, what people should, if somebody says, hey, we're not going to use, X, Y, or Z, please make sure that you stop that from being used on those laptops or work if you don't trust a certain tool. Make sure that you're securing your meeting. Make sure that you know who's actually inside of this. Somebody hasn't jumped in your meeting, or somebody hasn't made a way, asked people, 6 people got forwarded the email. Now there's somebody outside the organization, or maybe a contractor on there when you're discussing contract issues. So make sure that you're looking at who's in your meeting, who is going to be there, what information you're going to be sharing. Are all the people in there, do they have a need to know? Do they have a right to be able to do it? Is somebody recording it? Is somebody going to be sharing the files on there? So make sure that you look at all that stuff, and then don't reveal any information unintentionally. Make sure you're looking around your surroundings. We've all seen the funny picture of the person who's sitting there talking about security, and behind them is the day's password, for the computer system or for the, the Wi-Fi network. So make sure you understand what's around you when you're giving your talks or when you're doing these meetings. Are you sitting in a, conference room and somebody's got code that's up on the board that's proprietary to your company, or that's, intellectual property? Make sure that you have all these things thought through. But like I said, we're not in this by ourselves anymore. Nobody is securing their own kingdom. We all depend on other people. The supply chain risk is what the threat actors are looking at going after now. They're looking at doing things like we like to call island hopping, where they're attacking somebody downstream from you, somebody that doesn't have as good a security, and they're using their networks because they're a trusted vendor or trusted supplier for you. They're using their contacts or their emails in order to get into your organization. If you're expecting a invoice from company A, and the bad guys have gotten into company A and can attach malware to that invoice, you're going to trust that invoice, but it's also going to detonate malware on your systems. So we all depend on vendors and suppliers, infrastructure providers. We all have, public assistance that we need, whether it be your power company, water. These are all people that we rely on. And have we actually pulled them into our cybersecurity program? Have we actually discussed them being part of our incident response? That's what we're looking at. I mean, think about Target. It was HVAC security that did Target in. Equifax was a third-party software flaw. For those of you who aren't familiar, I highly suggest that you look up the Paradise Papers, where the threat actors realized that they could get the same information by attacking the law firms of the big organizations because they had, less security around their information, and get the same information, mergers, acquisitions, postings, intellectual property filings, those sort of things. So they were able to get all of that information, through the lawyers rather than through the company itself, because the company spent millions of dollars on cybersecurity. And, this was, the lawyers didn't necessarily spend as much. Domino's Pizza in Australia, is a good example. They were using a third party, so a cloud service, in order to do their online ordering. Well, they decided to go with a different vendor for their online ordering, so they switched vendors. But nothing in their contract said that vendor A needed to delete the data that they were using. So vendor A chose to keep all of that data in case that Domino's ever came back and wanted to do business with them again, or if something ever happened, they could resell the data back to Domino's. Well, vendor A got hacked. All that data got stolen, but guess who was still held responsible? Domino's. Even though they were no longer doing business with them, the customers all gave that information to Domino's, and it was Domino's responsibility in order to safeguard it. So that's what we're looking at, is do you understand where your data is? Is it in the cloud? We've had questions already on cloud-based, security and forensics and who's working with cloud. Does your incident response plan, look at how you're going to do things if the data was actually breached in the cloud, or if it was the interconnection between you and the cloud? Are they going to be able to work with you? Who's allowed to do forensics? Who's allowed to do incident response? who has jurisdiction, so make sure all that stuff is laid out from the ground up, that you enact and that you exercise these incident response plans with your vendors, suppliers, especially cloud services. Because what the threat actors are looking at, they can read the paper just like anybody else, for those of you who remember what a paper is, but they're software service providers and outside contractors. They're going to be looking to, hit the weakest link. Who's got the worst security? Do they have access to your networks? How do you give access to those people? They're looking at mergers and acquisitions. They're looking for hacking into the smaller companies about to get acquired so that they can get access to the bigger company when it all happens, become part of the baseline so that when systems merge together, there's always a time of flux. There's going to be more phishing emails. There's going to be more social engineering attempts during a merger and acquisition. They're going to try and embed things in back doors, whether it be hardware or software. Do you understand every piece of equipment that's going into your network? Did somebody go out to Best Buy and buy that cheap router to put on your network? Do they really know where it came from or what back doors might exist in it? Or does somebody have a digital picture frame on their desk which automatically downloads from their work laptop? Thumb drives, these are all the things that we're looking at. Do you actually know the route that your traffic takes? Do you understand the Internet of Things, where operational technology and information technology reside on your networks? So with all that being said, I've got a couple minutes left here. I just want to say my name is Clint Walker. I'm from the federal government, and I'm here to help. So what you see on the screen, it's not all, dark clouds. There is some silver linings. At DHS and CISA, we do offer a wide variety of social services out there for you to use. As Bradford already said, these are already paid for services. There's no, charge for anything that we do. We can do response assistance for you if you need it, if you do have an incident, but we prefer to work in the preparedness activities. We have cybersecurity advisors, and for those of you who need physical security help, we have protected security advisors who are willing to come out and help you with all of those things. Just to give you a quick rundown real fast, these are the cybersecurity assessments. We do everything from strategic assessments for your organization, which, like our previous presenter said, things that I'll talk to you about, the CIS benchmarks and things like that. We'll start working you through, do you have the framework in place to support a robust cybersecurity program? And then we get down into the technical things. We can do those risk and vulnerability or the penetration test for you. We can do a validated architecture design review. Anybody can contact me. I am one of the cybersecurity advisors for the Southwest region, and I can help you or walk you through a more detail on all these different services we offer. We do suggest that you start at the strategic level. Make sure you have the baseline in place to support a more technical program. What we found is when people do the technical first, they get that pen test done. They might fix the holes today, but their business processes just open them up tomorrow and things are right back to where they started from. So put the framework in place first and then get the technical things done. But we are here to assist you. We're here to help you figure out where you are today, where you want to be tomorrow, and the roadmap to get you there. Thank you very much.
And thank you so much for joining us. What is going to be interesting is that being that anywhere between 70 and 90%, depending upon where you reside in the United States, you're working from home. So with the penetration testing that you're doing, it is going to be varying because a lot of us are now at home. We haven't transitioned back to the office yet. So there's going to be an interesting delay and interesting, I guess, set of circumstances because our home firewall is way different than our office firewall. Wouldn't you agree?
Oh, very much so. And we've seen evidence that some of the more sophisticated threat actors are starting to target people in their home, trying to live on, like, say, their Xbox or their personal laptop, waiting for them to fire up their work laptop and then use the VPN connection. So get onto the work laptop and then use the VPN connection to get back through to the network, or just try and reside, because your laptops or your PCs might act differently in a home environment, not being connected to your, what we call ALAN, or your normal network. You might have different security controls for when it's in motion, what's being encrypted, what's not being encrypted, how's data being transmitted. So just be aware that your cybersecurity program probably needs to have changed. Your information handling procedures need to be changed for a work at home environment versus at everybody in the office environment.
Yeah, and then it'll be probably changed again once we transition back to the workforce. That is the work environment. Okay, we have a couple of good questions. Here's a good one. What are your personal or favorite feeds for staying apprised of DHS and CISA updates? Is there certain feeds, aside from your own, obviously, are there other feeds that you would recommend to our audience here?
I wish I could. We don't really allowed to make recommendations on that sort of thing. I just say find some that you like and that you agree with and start going with those. I mean, if you're part of a critical infrastructure that has some information sharing and analysis center, the ISACs, highly recommend the ISACs, especially, the multi-state ISAC, but just, trusted vendors and partners, and, just read as much as you can, find any of them that you can. That's the thing I don't really look at them these days because people are always coming to me and saying, hey, I've seen this, so I can't even keep up with everything.
And we always recommend joining, your associations are very, very important, like InfraGard for association,
Yes.
is a wonderful association that has great feeds. For the person that asked that question, join your local InfraGard chapter there. That will give you a direct connection with your local FBI office, which is essential, especially if you are in charge of protecting your critical infrastructure. Let's see, here's another one. Clint, do you have a criteria list of must-haves to check when choosing a teleconference vendor? Also, for those desiring a very robust security, for example, end-to-end encryption, is there a reliable list comparing vendors for most secure features? So I guess this is a two-part question. The first is there a criteria list? That's probably a long list when checking a teleconference vendor. Any ways to tackle that?
So I think this question be answered differently for every organization out there. I mean, so it's going to be different if you're going to be talking about intellectual property. It's going to be, so the banking industry might take a look at, what's important to them is one thing, critical manufacturing is something else, salespeople, it's going to be something else. So I think that what you need to do with any new technology that you're putting into your organization is to pull the stakeholders into the meeting and say, what do you need? Then pull your information security people in and say, how should we be transmitting or discussing this data? What are the minimum security requirements? When I was with the DoD, we had different requirements for unclassified, secret, top secret, or any other caveat of information we had. And there were different controls that had to be in place at each different level. And I find it funny that, the commercial world doesn't really prescribe to that. They just try and say, hey, let's just throw a one-size-fits-all and everything. Our salespeople, what's good for our salespeople is also good for people talking intellectual property or back-end code support. And you really need to look at what's being transmitted, what's being processed, what's being stored, and what are the minimum security controls you would like to have around that? What is the impact to the organization if that data were to leak out somehow? And then give your people the training and the expertise in that tool in order to utilize it. Because if you have a tool that nobody's utilizing properly, or there are people finding a way to get around it, then it's not of any good to you anyway. So,
sure. Here's speaking of the DoD, who says, in the DoD, we use a 6-step risk management framework approach to ensure security of systems. Does CISA ever adopt best parts of frameworks from various other agencies, or is it set up to its specific framework?
We work with all 16 sectors of critical infrastructure, including the DoD. So cybersecurity advisors, we are tasked with being, maybe not experts, but we are familiar with every framework out there. We have a crosswalk between all the tools that we use to the frameworks that we're working with, whether it be NERC-CIP, whether it be ISO 27001, whether it be NIST 800-53, the cybersecurity framework, CIS benchmarks. We got European, organizations that we work with. So we try and stay up on everything. All of our tools are built around the CERT resiliency management model, which can be incorporated into any framework. So we can tailor things to individual organizations based on what their requirements are. We even have a lot of organizations that have so you might have a company that's saying, hey, we have to be HIPAA compliant. We've got to be, NIST 800-53 because we have government contracts, but we're also NERC-CIP because we work with the Department of Energy. So they have multiple things, and we have to crosswalk against all of that. So we try and stay up on as many frameworks as possible, and we can work with any framework.
Excellent. Okay. Obviously, lots of questions. Will these slides be made available? Yes, they will. And here's another one. Have you thought much about firmware vulnerabilities, specifically UEFI?
So firmware vulnerabilities are always, I think they're overlooked a lot of times. And that's one of the reasons that we talk about, operational technology the way we do as well, because in operational technology, firmware is going to be one of the bigger vulnerabilities that they have. So firmware, making sure that you're updating firmware as well as, software and everything else. It should be part of your configuration management for firmware updates along with everything else that you're doing. So that should just be part of good configuration and good strategy in general.
Excellent. And I think that about wraps us up. Thank you so much again, Clint, for joining us. And
thank you.
Look forward to your next security briefing, hopefully next month. And certainly appreciate your service to our country. It's much needed, much appreciated. And again, always great information coming from you guys.
Thank you very much.
You got it. And to those people that have joined us for the entire session, you will be getting in approximately 2 days your CPE certificate from us. The slides that you've seen will be made available also within a few days. And the video, I've had quite a few questions with regards to the audio and video recording will be up. And it will also be up on cybersummitusa.com. Give us a few days to edit it and upload it to our website. We've got one more Power Hour tomorrow, and that'll be our conclusion for the May security briefings. And we look forward to seeing all of you again in each region of the country in June. Thank you again for joining us. We hope you've learned a lot, and we do appreciate your time. You take care, stay safe, stay secure, stay healthy. Take care from the Cybersecurity Summit.